Titanic Talk with Nelson and Alexandra Boyd. Here we feature stories from the independent documentary Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, and everything else to do with the iconic ship. From James Cameron's epic groundbreaking movie to the history and legacy of Titanic herself. Join us and our special guests as we continue the 25th anniversary celebrations of Titanic. This is your first-class ticket to everything aboard the Ship of Dreams.
I'm Nelson, a self-confessed Titaniac, and it's time for another podcast episode of Titanic Talk with my lovely and charming co-host, Alexandra Boyd, filmmaker, producer, director, and writer of the new documentary Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries. And we have a very special guest who Alexandra has brought into us from the documentary. Alex, take it away.
This special guest is featured in the documentary. She played a role that all of the real dyed-in-the-wool fans of James Cameron's Titanic will recognize. Yes, of course, you included, Nelson. Her name is Rebecca Klingler, but to all of us on set, she was Rebecca Mother at Stern. And that should be enough of a clue for you to know who she was and where she was in the film. Rebecca, welcome to Titanic Talk.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, both Nelson and Alexandra. It's funny, Alexandra, I think it, I don't know how many years ago, but I think for many years you only called me Rebecca Mother at Stern.
Yeah, I forgot your surname.
Is that German or Jewish? Mother at Stern?
I forgot your surname. Yeah, Mother at Stern, Rebecca Mother at Stern.
I loved it.
One word.
I loved it.
And that's how we sort of referred to all of each other around mostly the bar.
Right, mostly the bar.
Drinking margaritas. That's mentioned more than once in the documentary as well, because there was so much downtime. But you had a lot of downtime, but you had a lot of stunt time. Tell us about your part and tell us what that involved in and around not just doing your lines, so to speak.
Well, yes, the downtime was forever. I feel like the day after I got there, I did my lines, and then it was downtime for 6 weeks, 2 months. And then just before we took a break for Christmas, I will never forget, it was December 18th. I got there November 1st, and December 18th was when we broke for Christmas. That's when I did my stunt. And it was the same scene, but it was my death scene. And it was they had taken the hydraulic lift that we had used in the original when I said my lines. They had moved it inside to a sound stage. And I remember Jim was so nice. You know, as soon as I walk in, oh, there she is, giving me a big, he just made you feel he made you feel special, because that was my scene. And I guess you were not there that day, right, Alexandra? It would have only been third-class people, but there were a lot of people standing around. And so I had my child in my arms, Alex. Gosh, he'd probably grown a little bit since then, because it had a number of weeks and he was pretty small. But we were hanging on to the rail, and then the hydraulic lift went up to almost 90 degrees. And I had on my very heavy wool costume and the very heavy life jacket. And Alex also had on his life jacket. And then there was a stunt guy hanging on the rail. He fell off the rail. And then, wow, that was an amazing thing when I think about it. And then he was hanging on to my child's legs. And at that point, I was holding on with one arm to my child, myself, and to the stuntman. And then he pulls him out of my arms. I watch him fall to his death.
We didn't get to see that.
He cut it.
Do you think it was just too upsetting?
Yeah. I saw when at the night of the screening, I walked up to him. I said, Jim, we were all waiting in line to talk to him. I said, Jim, you cut my death scene. He said, I know, I'm sorry. It was just too horrific. But
Have you ever seen it? Does it exist somewhere? No.
No, I asked if I could get it. I said, is there any way I could get it? He said, of course, sure. I called.
But you know what? This just means that they may have survived. The mother and Stern and son may have been washed out and picked up by.
There's a sequel. So there's a sequel now. Yeah. If only.
25 years later.
Yeah, it's so funny because I called Lightstorm. I called several places looking for it, and they basically laughed at me. Like, you got to be kidding. But interestingly, and as Alexandra and I were talking about the last time we saw each other just before your cabaret, I noticed in Avatar that scene seems to be there.
There's a lot of parallels. There's a lot of tipping decks and underwater pockets of air and also
a child being pulled from someone's arms into the abyss.
Yes.
Like Stella Stevens said in the Poseidon Adventure, air pockets. Rebecca, were you strapped on? Like I'm picturing you hanging onto a child on the railing.
No, at that point, no. I was in the original when I did my line. I was strapped on, but for the death scene, I wasn't, because eventually, when I see my child fall to his death, there's nothing left for me to live for, and I let go, and then I fall, and then I fall. It was like a 6 feet drop from the edge of the lift to the crash pad, and Simon. What was Simon's last name?
Crane. Simon Crane.
How could I forget? Lovely Simon Crane was there to catch me time and time again. I don't know how many times I did it. And then he had to hoist me back up. I had to crawl back up the lift. And
we've actually reenacted that because we can't use, we've used some behind the scenes and tiny bits of the film itself, but we actually had this amazing young crew of stunt performers in Atlanta who were like, we'll do it, we'll reenact everything. So I sewed all of the Titanic life jacks, doing the inserts with car wash sponges from Home Depot. So actually they were light, and they weren't, they kind of cushioned them as they were throwing themselves on this makeshift poop deck that, yes, indeed, tilted to 90 degrees. And I thought, how is this going to work? Then we found this wonderful young stunt actress who looks just like you. I mean, we totally sell it with you. And we were teasing her a little bit because our rigger stunt guy, Cyrus, was catching her just as you had described, because I had heard you tell that story. And she was like, oh, can we just do it a couple more times? Can we go run another couple? And it was just so charming. Her face as they were dragging her back up to the top of the poop deck, she was like, this is really great.
Yeah, only I don't think I had anybody dragging me up. I think I had to crawl up. Simon hoisted me up. And I will say, it wasn't bad being caught in the arms of Simon Crane. That wasn't bad.
Yes. So we duplicated behind the scenes and the scenes. So it's in there.
Rebecca, your resume, I was looking at your IMDb page, and it's so extensive. You've done so much, but now to hear you, I didn't see stunt work in there anywhere. Were you, when you auditioned for Titanic, did you have to agree to stunt work? Did you somehow audition to do some stunt work, or was that just thrust upon you?
I guess it was thrust upon me, but interestingly, I guess until we're talking about it right now, I never really thought of it as stunt work, because I actually did have a stunt double. And somewhere in some of that downtime when we were all hanging out in the middle of the night, because that's when we would go to work, she came back. Her name was Lucy. I don't remember her last name. She was also English. And I remember them. It was a harrowing night, and everyone was, it looked like all the stunt people were white. And I mean, like, sheets of white. And and they were always so upbeat. They never wanted to complain. And I said, Lucy, how did I die? Beautifully. That's all I got. So, but I don't know, there must have been another scene where you see my body crashing, or I don't know.
Just imagine when you look at that whole sequence, which to me is the most fascinating and the most horrific all at the same time. Once the just before the ship breaks in two, you see the panic, and it's very quick editing and very quick cuts, and it goes backwards and forwards, and this is happening, and now that's happening at the other end, and it's just it's and I can only imagine how many hours and hours and hours of setups and shots it took to whittle it down to even that, because it's at least 30-40 minutes long. And then of course they intersperse Kate and Leo getting further and further towards the back end of the ship. But
that's where I see them. I
yes,
make eye contact with them.
yes,
there,
yes, they pass you, and they pass our friend James Lancaster, who played Father Biles, where they're watching, they're the audience, and James said the other day that when Leo went past him, by the time he got past him, he was like, oh, this stuff was really real, wasn't it? He'd been clearly concentrating on his job and his part and Kate and whatever was going on between the two of them. But then all of a sudden it dawned on him, because everything felt so real.
It really
and
did.
the actors around him, like yourself, like James, were not extras. They were cast specifically in these small, I don't even want to call them minor roles, in these small roles that are so significant that add to the sum of the parts of the film.
Was there any particular historical character, Rebecca, on which you fixated? Or did you just create Mother at Stern yourself?
I just kind of created her, but that is a really interesting question, because during that time, in my hometown, there was an elderly gentleman in the retirement home there, where my parents have lived now, but his mother was a survivor, and he used to tell stories about that. And she was, I think she was also a third-class passenger. So I think she was a nanny, though. She was a nanny, but I did think of that. But it was, but you know what? It was mainly the research that they had given us. Maybe not somebody so in particular, but all the research that they sent us. It gave you a really good feel of.
I can still hear you saying it'll all be over soon. Now, was she an Irish mother?
Okay, that's a very interesting story. They had a dialect coach on the set, and I asked Mally and Emily, I said, shouldn't I have
Mally is the casting director.
Mally is the casting director. I said, shouldn't I have some kind of accent, because I'm a third-class passenger. I mean, if I were American, that wouldn't make sense. How would I ever get, how would I ever had enough money to be overseas in the first place to come back? And they said, no, we want everybody to have their natural accents. I thought, okay, whatevs. And then months later, they had me come back and do some ADR work. And luckily, my neighbor, who's also an actor, was from County Cork. And he gave me a little coaching before. So
you re-recorded your line. You did additional dialogue recording for people who are learning. Another day's work.
Loved it.
Here's a question for both of you. It sounds, very perilous, Alexandra. Your role didn't seem to require quite as much physical jeopardy.
I didn't have to wear a corset. That was hard.
Oh well, that's true.
That's hard.
For hours, it is.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a bladder buster. But when you signed your contracts to take on these roles, ladies, was there I imagine there's some sort of indemnity against injury, accident, etc.?
Well, of course, because and actually that's why there are stunt performers, and stunt work is very dangerous, and that's what they sign up for. They train really hard. They're super fit. There's clearly an element of danger that they enjoy. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing that job in the first place. You've got to have balls of steel, men and women. And so when it comes to some of the stuff that either an actor is not trained to do or doesn't have the courage to do, or if you're an A-list actor and they can't afford for you to sprain your ankle or whatever and stop production. So really, I think, you know, and even on my super low budget film, we had a stunt double. We had somebody who wasn't the actress who did some of the underwater stuff, and you know, and it was very useful because that that underwater stunt performer was very experienced, and it just made everything go so much more smoothly. And I know, Rebecca, you talk about it in the film, that there was this element of danger and fear, because you're, you know, unless you're an action actor, you're not used to being around, you know, they rehearse and rehearse and rehearse without the actors there, and then it's action and the actors are having to get out of the way, and it can't always work smoothly. But you know, nobody died. I think there were a couple of injuries, but it's kind of what they're paid for. They're paid, they used to call it danger money in the BBC.
No risk, no reward.
Money. Yes.
You know, there's a psychology to that as well. And seeing that the name of the documentary is Titanic Movie Diaries, Off the Ship of Dreams, I was very moved by Rebecca's recitation of some of her diaries. Maybe we can talk more about that and her remembrances.
Sure. Well, Alexandra did suggest that I read a section that I didn't read in the documentary, and I'm going to get a little bit emotional. This was referring to something that my dad had sent me. My dad just died last Wednesday. So after being ill for a while, but he was 96, almost 97. So, you know, it's not like he was ready to go, but it's still sort of sad. He was an English professor and also an avid journal keeper. So as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, gosh, I wish I would have read this to him, you know, in some of his final days, you know, when they could only hear. But c'est la vie. He's hearing it now. And this is in reference to an article that he had sent me that John Updike had written for the New Yorker. And here it is. November 13th, 6 a.m. Many of us spend our time hanging out in someone's dressing room, usually Brian's, watching videos from John Landau's collection in the PA's office. We've been watching the 4-part E&A documentary on the Titanic. It is a little dry because there isn't that much footage available, but the interviews with survivors and writings from others are really moving. What really grabbed me was the article Dad sent me from the New Yorker by John Updike. It was a commentary on class distinction that was so blatant in the percentage rate of first-class survivors versus those from steerage. The wealthy white men were reported to have shown great bravery by allowing women and children seats in lifeboats ahead of them. Many more third-class children died than first-class men. The whole incident seemed to be a warning against human arrogance as we entered into the most technological age in human history. The creators wanted to bask in the glory of the ship's magnitude, but paid little attention to the impact such size would have in a disaster. Too few lifeboats for its many passengers, no alarm system to let the citizens of the marine city know an emergency was taking place. Captain Smith was probably at a loss because he had never sailed anything so large before. It was almost too big for its time. But of course, the fatal mistake that he and everyone else made was thinking this 20th century state-of-the-art machine was unsinkable. The story has everything: grandeur, nostalgia for an exciting time in history, irony and mystery. No wonder so many attempts have been made at recreating it. Did I go on too long?
No, I'm gripped. Keep going.
Okay, all right. It is hard to ignore the parallels between the ship and the production. Both are the largest of their kind to date. There does seem to be a lack of organization at times, a small example being the fact that I will probably be here into next week, and I was scheduled for 4 days. Like the Titanic's crew, no one in the production has handled a project quite this size. The question remains, will this project meet with disaster as did the Titanic itself, or will it emblazon its memory as nothing has before? Only the stunt people have been working. It must be pretty harrowing out there. They all look like sheets when they come in. Oh, here it is. I asked Lucy how things were going, and she looked at me with wide eyes without answering. Then I asked George, and he just took a deep breath, mustered up a smile, and he said, "Great. What a spirit." Guess that's it. I thought I was.
That is amazing.
Nothing someplace else, but
That was wonderful. That was wonderful. Yes. Thank you for that. And in fact, there is little snippets of that in the documentary. So it'll give everyone a little idea of what to expect when they watch it. What was it like revisiting those memories so long ago? Because I think when I handed you the diary that I had had for all these years, and I hadn't reread mine, I wasn't sitting in a corner rereading my diary every year. What was that feeling? Was there a lot that you had forgotten and that came back because you had your diary?
Yeah, when I first read that in the documentary, that was yeah, and it did take me, it took me by surprise as I was reading it. Yeah, I had forgotten some of it, and it was quite a rush to remember all of that. And I'm so glad that I had this journal, because it was a pretty amazing thing to take part in. And oh yeah, and I had just had a flood of feelings about it. It was my third film ever. I'd only been in LA for 9 months, so everything was kind of new, and it was really a spectacular experience.
You're a wonderful writer. And so I'm curious to know, did you do you keep up with journaling? Do you write?
Well, I've been writing a pilot. So I've been trying to write write for television. But yeah, it's really nice to read this. I do write, I learned to write from my dad. He's, as I said, he was a writer and professor. And right now, there were 7 of us in the family. I lost my sister, but my remaining siblings and I are all like battling over his obituary right now, whether or not to leave as is, because he wrote his own, or if we should, be arrogant enough to edit his words. But
what a legacy for him, though, that I rather like the fact that you're fighting over it. I think
it makes sense,
wonderful legacy to him. He's probably just laughing to himself, well, those are my kids. I raised them right.
I agree.
Whatever he uses is going to be wonderful.
You took the words out of my mouth. I thought this is, how could it be any other way? But it is interesting, because I don't, Nelson, to answer your question, I don't really keep journals, but I'm really glad I have this one, because this is more like what my dad would write. It's like record keeping, and my journals are more like, like morning pages, just getting it out. I'm just getting out my feelings. And that's the kind of thing he hated. But to me, it's cathartic, and it's just, it gets me, it's kind of a warm up to writing, but this is much more in line with what he would do.
Pulling this out of my drawer, I've been keeping these for maybe 15, 20 years. It's a book of blessings. And I just write down 5 things a day, just 5 things a day I'm grateful for, whether that was like dinner, or my 30-year friendship with Alexandra, or or whatever, or just the technology to have a podcast. So I mean, everybody has their yearbook in some fashion.
And every time I hear an actor read a bit more from their diaries, because you can imagine we only have a tiny snippet of everyone's diary in the film. There's just no time to put everything in there. It's making me think we need to collate them and publish them and make them available.
I was thinking the same thing, Alexandra. I think, it was like, because I was reading, when I got my file out, we would have these meetings, and we were hoping to, I think, publish these diaries, like the for the year anniversary or something.
Yeah, nobody was really interested, and you couldn't self-publish in those days. There was no internet. There was no,
Right.
you had to go through a publisher, and they were like, meh, you know. And so they just stayed in my computer and went from new computer to new computer to new computer every time. I still had them. And to me, they're a historical, as personal as they are to us, they are a historical document of what life is like on a movie set, and particularly on that movie set, because it pertains to all of the action that all of the people who know the film so well know so well. They get even more behind the scenes stories that they couldn't imagine that there was any more, you know.
I think we should revisit that project. I think it would
Okay.
They're your heart of the ocean. The journal is your heart of the ocean.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Anyway, and you know, thank you for instigating this, because I honestly, I haven't looked through the whole thing again, but it was fun to read that section too, because I do remember thinking, I contemplated that a lot. And Alexandra, I'm sure I talked with you about it. I'm sure I talked with this phenomenon of, you know, class distinction, and how the movie set, and I was fairly new to movie sets. You know, that's been an ongoing thing, you know, but I could just see this parallel in class distinction that actually is still prevalent on movie sets. Although I think that, you know, there are now being attempts made to equalize and to, you know, have more respect for the people who, you know, just for background.
Yes,
That
it's a hard job. It's a really hard job. And we've spoken to Judy and Ellen, our two featured background artists, and they loved it. They sort of threw themselves into it, hook, line, and sinker. And they were just, you know, you could tell, but there were still moments of danger. But in the film, they're just laughing about it. But they obtained skills that I don't think they expected to walk away with after, you know, the poop deck and the tank and everything. I mean, they were there longer than any of us.
Right.
Yes.
They were background. So they were in all scenes.
All the time.
Rebecca, where was Titanic on your radar before you got the audition for Titanic? Like, had you had any interest in it or knowledge of it whatsoever?
Absolutely. Well, when I was a kid, I'm trying to remember how old I was. I'm thinking I was like in 4th grade. A TV movie came out of Titanic, right? Isn't that right? I mean, I have to.
There was a Catherine Zeta-Jones miniseries, but that wouldn't have. That was.
Dude, this was way.
Yeah.
We're talking like 1968 probably, and or 67 even. And I remember just being fascinated by it, and I you know, I was obsessed with it. And then, you know, I grew up and kind of went on. But so when I found out they were doing, you know, when I got the audition, I was like, wow, this is so cool. Because I don't know, you know, there's just something about something elegant and tragic.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love that?
You know, it's an iconic part of history.
Yes, and you can't argue with all those real stories. I know, you know, that Nelson helped me research my audition for my monologue, and it's just, once you start to scratch the surface of all these people and all these accounts, and you know, there's 1,500 people died, but all these survivors who had, you know, this, what we now know is PTSD, what we now know is survivor guilt, all of that stuff. You know, Bruce Ismay was, you know, vilified the rest of his life because he was the owner and he was the one for, and you know, we can't imagine what the survivors' lives were like as well. And it's all sort of, you know, you'd have a 5, 6, 7 hour movie if you wanted to tell all of the stories. And I've often said, if James Cameron made this story now, it would be a Netflix miniseries. It would be like The Crown, $10 million an episode, and they would do everything. You'd have you'd get to work around the entire ship and not leave one thing out, because again, they weren't doing
more in
1996.
Because I think that was one thing that was, I mean, I feel like when I saw the screening, I was left a little bit disappointed because as I'm sure a lot of people were, especially if they got cut out. But they went to such great pains to really be historically accurate with all of the characters, and then those characters were barely seen. And I agree. You know, he could still do a mini series. Why not? There was so much left out.
Yeah.
And it would be kind of
this
fun.
won't be the James Cameron's Titanic will not be the last Titanic incarnation for sure. For generations to come, this story will be told and retold, and we will find out that Mother at Stern was washed off, picked up by a lifeboat, and probably ended up in that nursing home somewhere, telling her stories.
With her grown son now taking care of her.
There you go. What a lovely full circle. Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming in.
Thank you, you guys.
Again.
So grateful.
So much fun.
I'm so excited for people to see you in the documentary, because you have told some wonderful stories in a wonderful way.
Thank you so much, you guys.
And thank you for Alexandra for introducing me to Rebecca, and I feel like I have a new friend as well. So part of the ever expanding Titanic family.
Likewise.
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much,
Thank
you guys.
you so much.
Take care. Bye.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review. And if you'd like to hear more podcasts like this, hit the subscribe button. For information on where you can see Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, go to shipofdreamsfilm.com. Titanic Talk is a production of Ship of Dreams Film Limited.